B'ezrat Hashem, today, Masechet Shabbat, we're going to start at the 2 dots on Mem Amud Bet towards the top of the page. Tanu Abanan Mevi Adam Kiton Ma'im Umanicho Keneged Hamidura. That's where we're starting. We're going to have 2 sections in today's learning. Something very interesting. Warming up water by the fire, and then we're also, in the same context, going to discuss warming up oil by the fire on Shabbat. Now, what's the chiluk? We'll see. There might be a chiluk between warming up oil and warming up water by a fire on Shabbat. Why that's a chiluk, we'll see in a minute. And then the second section, we'll see it's machloket, different shitot, v'chulei. And the second section we're going to discuss is 2 stories where R Zeira saw R Avahu doing certain things, and then he discussed what exactly was the reasoning. It was mutar, asur. We're going to get into those 2 different stories. B'ezrat Hashem. Okay, so let's just remember what we're holding here. We are discussing this idea that even waters that were warmed up before Shabbat, it's not so simple that you're allowed to bathe, cook, v'chulei. And this brought us to a discussion about putting warm towels or kettle on a person's stomach when they're not feeling well. Remember that?
We didn't mention that. I don't remember that.
We did yesterday. The last thing. You put warm towels on a person's stomach, but you can't put the kettle. That's the end of yesterday. So today we're going to discuss, beginning with a discussion which is a machloket Tanaim, 3 shitot, Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So just to understand for a second, what is the isur of bishul on Shabbat? Let's get this very clear. Let's just understand, be'etzem, what is the isur of bishul?
To take food and by the power of the heat to change his condition.
To improve his food through the medium of heat. That could be cooking with water, with afiyah, baking, sliyah, all of these things would be nechlal. But the key word is improving it in some significant way. But meaning, let's say I take heat and I don't improve it. It's the same thing. So l'chaora, there shouldn't be...
You take heat and you don't improve it?
I use heat, but it's not really improving the item. So then, l'chaora, 1 second. So then l'chaora, it shouldn't be bishul. It shouldn't be the yisur of bishul. For sure not midoraita. It shouldn't be. So this is going to be the uniqueness. We're going to make a chiluk between water and oil. Very interesting thing. We're going to have a machloket about this, but the logic that the Tanakama seems to say, we'll see, is like this. Water, you put it near the fire and it boils up. We'll see what boiling. Is it warm? Is it yad soledet? We'll get to that. It improves the nature of the item because, let's say, for example, you couldn't use it for tea before. Now you can use it for tea or for coffee. Yeah. Water boiling up is improvement. It's improvement. So that would be considered something that's bishul, perhaps. Oil, according to the Tanakam, we're going to see, shalom, shalom, according to Tanakam, he's going to say, oil is not the same. Oil, even being heated up, it doesn't improve it necessarily. To me, it's a chidush. To me, it's a chidush. Hold on. We're going to see 3 shitot in the Tanaim about this, but you hear the chiluk. The chiluk we're going to try to make is, whereas water perhaps is improved when it's heated up, oil is not necessarily improved in any way. Not in taste, not in smell, not in appearance, nothing is improved. Now, you're arguing already, I understand, but let's see the shitot inside. That's the logical chiluk we're going to try to make, so it's not bishul. I mean, that's going to be, let's see.
But in reality, oil gets destroyed when it's getting heat.
It's getting destroyed.
Yes, of course. Oil saruf, shemen saruf.
Oil saruf.
When you put in too much fire on the oil, you burn the oil. It's destroyed.
But on the other hand, you could argue is heating it up makes it warm. You can use it for cream. There are other things perhaps that it could help. Right. It's nicer to eat a dish.
Any proof by oil, it's more.
The point is, a little warmer, it could be usable for other things too. We're going to speak about putting as a cream also. So there's certain things that it could be beneficial. אני רק אומר לכם שזה החילוק שהגמרא מדברת על זה. אבל let's see what it is. Let's see. Tanu Abanan, says the Braita. Okay, about 10 lines from the top of the page. Tanu Abanan, says the Braita. Mevi adam kiton mayim, a person can bring a jar of water, a jug of water, umanicho keneged hamidura, and he's allowed to put it opposite the fire. Now I want to point something out here. It's keneged, it's not on top of the fire. On top of the fire would be like a bishul problem, but similar to bishul, you can't do that. Keneged, you could put it near the bonfire on Shabbat. Now very important. Lo bishvil she'chamu, not in order to actually heat it up, let's say like yad soledet, ela bishvil she'tafig tzinatan. You have cold water. You want to drink cold water. You want to drink water, but it's so cold, it's not comfortable. You want it to be room temperature. You want it to be a little warmed up. So you're allowed to put it near the fire, not that it actually becomes boiling like Yad Soleret, but just so that Tafik Tzinatan means the chill comes out of it. The chill is removed from it. This is considered permissible on Shabbat. That's not bishul. That would be acceptable. That's the Tanakama's shita. Okay? Fine. Slicha, 1 second.
But 1 second. It's allowed?
Yeah, that's what Tanakama says. Exactly. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda is the second Tana in the Braita. He says like this: Mevia isha pach shel shemen. A woman is allowed to bring a jar of oil. Umanichato kineged amdura, and she could put it near the bonfire. Again, lo bishvil sheyibashel, not in order that it should cook. Ela bishvil sheyifshol. Only sheyifshil. Not that it should cook, but rather in order that it should just warm up. Meaning what the Tanakama says of water, Rabbi Yehuda says of oil. And Evantem? The Tanakama says about water, Rabbi Yehuda says about oil. Now we're going to have to figure out what exactly is Tanakama arguing, because there's a mashmot, there's a machloket here. So again, Tanakama says you're allowed to put water near the fire to warm it up, but not to cook, not to heat it like Yad Soledet, just to take out the chill, little room temperature. Rabbi Yehuda adds to this, seemingly cholek, but he's adding, a woman could take oil near the fire, again, not to heat it up, but rather ifshol, meaning that it should be warmed up to some degree. Again, she's going to use it for, let's say, oil on her skin, something like that. You could already smear it. It's not a problem smearing because it's a liquid, but it's too cold, fine. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Isha sachayada shemen, a woman, now this is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel's argument, Rabbi Yehuda.
But it's another issue.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Sicha?
In Shabbat.
So why is it asur?
Asur sicha b'Shabbat.
Why? Why is it asur? To anoint. To anoint. So let's see. B'dafka, it seems like from here it's not, but let's see. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel argues and he says like this. You're not allowed to do it in the derech of chol, the way you usually do it during the week. So therefore, you can't put the oil near the fire to warm it up. Again, keep in mind, not to boil it, but just to warm it up, you're not allowed to do. So you have to do it kil achar yad. You have to do this in a way that is like an irregular way, like behind the arm literally, but it means in a way that's not a shinoi, a changed way. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says what you're allowed to do is isha sachayada shemen. You can put the woman can put the oil on her arm. Umechamamta keneged amdura. Warm it up near the fire. V'sacha libna katan, and then she's allowed to take that oil and put it on her baby. Ve'ena chosheshet, and there's no problem. Now, where is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel arguing? He's saying you can warm it up near the fire, but not in the normal way of chol. So therefore, the normal way you'd put the oil near the fire and warm it up. This has to be done in an irregular way, a shinoi. How do you do b'shinoi? Put it on your arm first and warm it up near the fire, and then take that and put that on the baby. So that's the end of the Braita. Now I want to write down the 3 shitot so we can have them clear in front of us.
And mine is asur.
So let's see. So like this. We have 3 shitot in the Braita. They're not so clear yet, but let's just put down what we know. We have here like this. Tanakama says mutar to put water mutar
near the bonfire.
מים נגד המדורה
כדי להפיק צינתן.
רק כדי להפיק סליחה צינתן אבל לא לחמם, which we're going to have to clarify what that means exactly. We're going to see Yad Soledet. That's Tanakama. Then we have Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda says the same story but with oil. Oto sipur, the same halacha, the same halacha.
B'shemen.
The same halacha. And then we have Ashbag, who says differently. He says, יכול לעשות את זה עם שמן, אבל בדרך שינוי.
למרוח על היד שלו, ואז לקרב את היד לאש, נכון?
דווקא.
מה שזה נהיה יותר ליקודי, ונוח את זה להתאים.
שינוי. Okay, so now, the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel seems to be pretty clear, which is You want to heat up the oil. Sorry, it's not a good word to use because it's confusing. You want the oil not to be cold. How are you going to warm it up? So Rabbi Yehuda says you put it near the fire. Again, as long as it's not heated up to yad, so let it boiling, it's okay. Shifman says you're allowed to do it, but only b'derech shinui. Now I want to just point something out. The way that the Mefarshim explained Hava lo lechamim. How do you understand lo lechamim? So it means it means time frame. You can leave it there only so long as it warms up, but it doesn't become boiling.
Why time frame?
Let's say it takes 10 minutes to boil.
But could be the fire is very strong. It'll be in 2 minutes.
So you have to figure out. This is two ways the Rishonim speak this out. I want to say clear. The two ways the Rishonim understand this. One way the Rishonim understand this, Tanakama is saying you could put the water by the fire only to remove the chill, but not to boil it. It means you have to figure out how long is it going to be till it boils, and you can take it before that. The other way the Rishonim explain is distance to the fire. Maza distance to the fire. You could only put it close enough to the fire that it won't boil. Meaning it's not a time frame as much as Tanakama is saying, let's say this close will boil.
The space is more safe.
There's two ways they understand exactly what Tanakama is saying.
It's more safe.
Okay, there's two ways they understand. Meaning, is the Tanakama, there's two ways to understand it. But just either way, you have to make sure it's not going to boil.
And the second thing is the distance.
Two ways to look at it, exactly. It's just two ways to look at exactly what Tanakama's pshat. But either way, you learn you're not allowed to let it boil. You have to only remove the chill, and then you remove it from the fire.
But once I start to work on timing, then it all depends by the distance.
No, it's two different issues.
Lama?
There's two different ways of looking at the Tanakama. Either when they say
if it's too close, the time is shorter. If it's too far, the time is longer.
No, but it's too far, that's never going to get to a Yad Soledet Bo.
Exactly.
It's far enough that even for 10 hours, you never get to it.
Meaning, basically, what is the geder of the Tanakama? What's the way you avoid lechamim? Is it that you make sure 5 minutes and you remove it? Or is it that you can't put it close enough to the fire
like the second,
so that it will never boil? That's two ways to look at Tanakama.
That you're never going to boil the water.
But now the question the Gemara wants to know is, what does the Tanakama hold about oil? Because he doesn't mention oil. So what does the Tanakama hold legabe oil? And we're going to have a machloket between Rav Avahu Rav Yosef and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, very similar to how we understood a machloket before of Chia bar Abba, if you remember. We'll see in a minute. So let's see. Let's see. We'll see. We'll understand all of it. We'll go through each of the shitot, how they understand all three of the Tanaim. Ibailahu. The Gemara says like this. They ask the following question. Shemen mahu letanakama. According to the Tanakama, what is the law of oil? Means the gabe shemen, according to the Tanakama, how is it treated? So Rav and Rav Yosef dami tarvayu le'etera. Rav and Rav Yosef both said that the Tanakama is lenient with oil, mekil, lenient, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar le'isura. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that actually Tanakama is machmir le'isura, that oil is more machmir than water. Okay? Remember we had the same type of machloket on Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Chia bar Abba said legabi shihiyah. Remember, if you put it on bishogeg before Shabbat, so Rav Chia bar Abba said, unlike bishul where there's a chiluk between shogeg and mezid, shihiyah, there's no difference. We had a machloket. Is there no difference that it's the same shitot?
Before
We're just
the
explaining over
the
here.
no?
That's what we came out. But the point is, again, Rav and Rav Yosef say that the Tanakam is being matir oil. Nachman bar Yitzchak says no, he's asur, he's machmir on oil. So let's see. Rav and Rav Yosef dami tarvayu le'etera. Let's explain the Braita according to Rav and Rav Yosef. Like this. Tanakama starts off and says, Shemen. So Tanakama says, with water, you can take away the chill, but not heat it up. Again, distance or time, fine. But Shemen, according to Tanakama, afal pi shayad soleret bo mutar. Chidush. According to the Tanakama, even if it boils to the degree of yad soleret, mutar. Now, why is it mutar?
Because you cannot do anything with yad soleret of oil.
Exactly. Because bishul means improving the item through heat, and Tanakama's opinion is oil is not significantly improved when it's heated up. So even though yad soleret means is
you can't touch it.
Meaning it's so hot that you're going to move your hand back. Yes. Doesn't make a difference. With water, it makes a difference. With oil, doesn't make a difference. So even if it's yad soleret, it's mutar to do this on Shabbat. Okay.
Lislot is not to lo, is to unlike.
Unlike, exactly. Rashi's words are soleret is nimshechet la'achorea mida'aga shelo tichveh. It jumps back because you don't want to get burnt. That's what Rashi says. So like this, Kasavar Tanakama, what does the Tanakama hold? Now again, this is with Rabba and Rav Yosef who say Le'eteva. Rabba of Rav Yosef hold Shemen ein bo mishum bishul, that there's no bishul when it comes to Shemen. There's no benefit afforded to the oil, mele it's not a problem. So that's Tanakama, according to Rabba of Rav Yosef. Va'ata Rabbi Yehuda l'meimar, and Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, no, Shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. There is bishul, meaning he argues on that yesod. He says, no, oil, when it's heated up, it is improved.
How?
It does become improved. The oil, it does become improved.
No, but how?
He holds that there's a benefit that you could do with it now. What is that benefit? Perhaps to smear as oil, as a cream.
Can't smear oil
The
soil by Yad Soledet, but it's gvia.
Oh, 1 second, not Yad Soledet, hold on. V'ata Rabbi Yehuda l'meimar shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. There is bishul, but Rabbi Yehuda holds v'hefshero lo zeu bishulo. Two things. Number one, 1 second. Yes, they're explaining the Tanaim. So again, Tanakama holds, let's get it clear. Tanakama holds there's no concept of bishul by oil, meaning it's not an improvement. Memele, you can heat it up to Yad Soledet, it's not a problem. Rabbi Yehuda holds there is a concept of bishul with oil, but that's only true if it's Yad Soledet. But if Shero, just to remove the chill from it, that's not considered the bishul of oil, and that's not going to be asur, which is why he says you can do like the Tanakama says of water with oil, you can remove the chill as long as it's not Yad Soledet. Va'ata Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel meimar, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel comes to say, Shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. So he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, there is a problem of bishul when it comes to oil, but v'hefshero zeu bishulo. He is cholek that he holds even just warming up the oil, removing the chill from the oil, that already is considered the bishul of the oil. Now let me just explain why is that. Remember we learned by the salted fish, we said if you pour boiling water over it, you're chayav for bishul. Why is that? That's not the normal way of bishul, because that's the way that item is improved for consumption. So Rav Shimon Gamliel says oil, its bishul is, even if it's not Yad Soledet bo, it already becomes improved simply by warming it up, taking away the chill. So Memela, Rav Shimon Gamliel says like this, I agree with you, Rabbi Yehuda, there's a problem of bishul when it comes to oil, but I'm even more machmir. I hold that problem exists even just warming it up, because that's already considered a significant improvement. Memela, the only way you're allowed to do this is b'derech shinui.
How it's significant?
So let's go through the three shitot now according to Rabba v'Rav Yosef. According to Rabba v'Rav Yosef, Tanakama is being mekil when it comes to oil. So again, water you could only put near the fire if it's only going to reach a temperature of removing the cold, but Yad Soledet would be asur, you're not allowed to do that. Oil, even if it becomes Yad Soledet, it's mutar. Why is it mutar? Because Tanakama says there's no bishul when it comes to oil. Why not? Not a significant improvement. Rav Yehuda's cholek, he says no. There is a concept of oil being improved, but the improvement is only when it's Yad Soledet. So memele, if it only gets to the temperature of warmed up, removing the chill, that would be mutar. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, I agree with you, Rabbi Yehuda, there's a concept of bishul when it comes to oil, but that concept is even a lower temperature. Even when it's only warmed up, that is the bishul of oil. That's already the improvement. And memela, even that would be asur to do. So that's why it has to be done b'derech shinui. That's all this according to Rabba v'Rav Yosef. Good?
So how הוא מתיר it just because of the shinui is allowing the...
Exactly, because you do kla'achar yad, so then you're allowed to improve it that way. Now that was all within Rabba v'Rav Yosef. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak says that Tanakam is more machmir with oil. Now we're going to have to explain the three shitot according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Okay? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar li isura. Rav Nachman says no. The Tanakam is actually saying it's prohibited with oil. It's more of a problem than water. Like this. Shemen, when it comes to oil, af al pi she'ein hayad soledet bo asur. Actually, the Tanakam is saying is like this. Water, it's only a problem if it reaches yad soledet. But oil is even a problem if it's not Yad Soledet. Why? Kasavar, because the Tanakama holds Shemen yesh bo mishum bishul. Again, now we're going the other way. Is that actually Tanakama holds oil is improved when it's heated up, and that's a problem.
Like Rashbag.
Like Rashbag in this shita. Ve'efshero zeu bishulo. And even just warming it up, that's already significant that it's bishul. And on that, va'ata Rabbi Yehuda l'meimar, this is the same as within Rabba v'Rav Yosef. Rabbi Yehuda comes to say, hefshero lo zeu bishulo. No, it's only if it reaches Yad Soledet that it's bishul, but it just hefshero is not, so that's why that wouldn't be a problem. So he says, I agree with you that there is a problem of bishul, but just warming it up creates the bishul. Now what's the obvious question, Chevra? According to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, which Matan just pointed out, Rav Shimon Gamliel and Tanna Kama are saying the same thing. Because they're both saying, what? What are they both saying?
Bishulo ve'efshero.
There is a problem of bishul and efshero, zeo bishulo. So then what's the machloket between Tanna Kama and Rashbag? So the Gemara says, Rav Shimon Gamliel hainu Tanna Kama, hikebenayu k'la'achar yad. The machloket between them is it mutar to do it k'la'achar yad? According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, they both agree that there's a problem of bishul. They both agree efshero, zeo bishulo even. Question is, can you do b'derech shinui? So Rav Shimon Gamliel could do derech shinui. Tanna Kama is machmir on this. They say you can't even do b'derech shinui. So now let's just say the shitot clear. The way Rabba and Rav Yosef learned the machloket, Tanna Kama is the most lenient shita. Tanna Kama says
and bishul b'shemen.
There's no bishul b'shemen. Even yad soledet bo is not a problem. Only by water is there a problem when it's yad soledet. Rav Yehuda holds, according to Rabba and Rav Yosef, that there is a problem of bishul, but hefshero lo bishul is not bishulo. Rabbi Yehuda says there is a problem of bishul when it comes to shemen, but that's only if it reaches yad soledet. If it's not yad soledet, it's mutar. Ashbag says, I agree with you, there's bishul when it comes to shemen, but even when it's only hefshero, even if it's the lower temperature, that would be a problem, so it has to be done k'la'achar yad. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says the opposite. Actually, Tanna Kama is the most machmir. What does he say? Tanna Kama says when it comes to oil, you're not even allowed to do k'la'achar yad, because he holds bishul is nogea to oil, hefshero zeo bishulo, and even k'la'achar yad is asur. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, I hold you like you, but k'la'achar yad is mutar. And Rav Yehuda says, no, it's only a problem if it's yad soledet. If it's not yad soledet, it's mutar. Okay? That's the two ways to understand the machloket. Let's continue. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So he says, psak. Echad shemen be'echad mayim. So he says like this, whether it's oil, whether it's water, yad soledet bo asur, asur to raise the temperature to yad soledet bo, ein yad soledet bo mutar. Now let's stop for a second. That means what's the psak of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel? But what is the psak that he's saying by shemen?
Either soledet or no soledet.
No, but let's put back in the words of the Gemara. That means he's saying there is bishul by oil.
But only yad soledet.
Yesh bishul b'shemen. Avarak b'yad soledet. Hefshero lo zeo bishulo. It's not considered bishulo. Which of the shitot? It follows Rabbi Yehuda. Means there is bishul when it comes to oil.
Only b'yad soledet.
But it's only b'yad soledet, like the middle shita, like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, ve'echidam yad soledet. But Rashi says, well, what's the question? How do you know yad soledet? You pull your hand back. So he says, because you have some people more sensitive, some people are less sensitive. So some people, probably you're less sensitive because you're cooking all day. People that have, so then how do you determine what's yad soledet when you pull your hand back? So I'll tell you a geder that's shove l'chol nefesh. If this is hot enough that it would burn the belly of a baby. What does it mean? It means that baby's stomach is very sensitive. Yeah. So if this item is hot enough, it's a little over 100 degrees perhaps, maybe a little more than that, a little less, that would already be considered...
100 degrees is boiling.
No, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. I think there's machloket in the current poskim how much this is exactly, but it's not such a high temperature. I just want to point out it's not such a high, it's not so hot. If it burns the belly of a baby, that would be considered yad soledet. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says the following. Now pay attention to the details here, Chevra, based on what we learned yesterday about gzerat mechatzaot. Pam achat, one time, nichnasti achar Rebbe lebeit hamechatz. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Esai was one of the last students of Rebbe. I entered after Rebbe, Yehuda Nasi, to the beit hamechatz. Now we're going to see. This was on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went to the Beit HaMerchatz. How was he allowed to? Chamei Tveria. Okay. He lived in Tveria. This is after the Gzera. And he went into Chamei Tveria. Okay. So Yitzchak bar Avdimi says like this. Ubikashti laniach lo paksha shemen ba'ambati. Now we're going to see the nature of this was like this. There was like a bath, like we have in the mikveh, like a pool on the ground. And the water of Chamei Tveria went into that. Now Chamei Tveria we know is chama. So it's mutar be'etzem. It's not included in the gzera. We said at the end of it, when they pulled back, hetiru chamei tveria. So this shouldn't be a problem. We're going to see there's a bishul problem with something that he wanted to do. So let's see. I wanted to put a little jar of oil in the hot water that was in the mechatz to warm it up. Okay, I don't want to boil it, but I want to warm it up. So Rabbi said to me, Tol bekli sheni v'ten. What you could do is, don't put it directly in the water. Instead, take a bucket, take some water out, so it's a kli sheni, and then you could put this little jar of oil inside of that. Now, why is this kli sheni? Let's just speak it out. But let's speak it out. What's going on here? The frying pan's on the fire. You take it off the fire. What's that frying pan called? Rishon. So in a similar way, we're going to see is that the water came from chamei tveria and it came to this pool. That's considered water that's clearly shown. The water's clearly shown. You take some out in a bowl, it makes the water kli sheni. Now the logic that Rashi explains is whenever you move it to a kli sheni, the water cools down a little bit and the bishul issue is removed. So if Yehuda Nasi said don't put it directly in the mechatz, this water, but remove it in a kli sheni, and that's a kli sheni, you could put the oil to warm it up, whatever they wanted to use that for. So the Gemara says, we see three halachot that come out of this psak, meaning there's three halachot that emerge from what Rebbe told Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe told Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdi.
Yeah, obviously hold this bishulin b'shemen, afilu shelo haya sholedet bo.
So shma min hashemen yesh bo mishum bishul. First of all, we see there's a problem of bishul. How do we see? Because he said don't put it in the actual water. That would be bishul. So one, we see paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. V'shma mina, we also see kli sheni eno mevashel. We see that a kli sheni doesn't create a bishul, because he said if you remove the water, you put the oil in, it's not mevashel. Beautiful. V'shma mina, we see a third halacha, hefshero zeu bishulo. How do we see hefshero zeu bishulo?
למה אם היה משאיר אותו בתוך הזה, זה היה מפשיר, זה לא היה רותח, לא היה צולל
אם אתה תשים את זה בתוך הכלי ראשון, inside of that would be considered bishul. So you see, even he didn't want to cook it, he just wanted to warm it up. So you see, hefshero zeu bishulo. So now it comes out, by the way, is that like Rabbi Yehuda? It's not like Rabbi Yehuda, meaning it would come out seemingly like the other shitot, hefshero zeu bishulo. Exactly. That's what it sounds like. Now comes Rashi, and Rashi says, no, it's not true. Really, he paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. Listen to the chidush here. If you look at Rashi, he says something a little bit vague, but the Rishonim explain like this. V'shma mina hefshero b'makom hara'oi lebishul. Hefshero zeu bishulo, if it's in a place that is ra'oi lebishul. What does that mean? What does that mean? If the water is clearly shown, that's ra'oi levashel, right? We know that does bishul. There we're going to say hefshero zeu bishulo. So that's why you can't put it in the clearly shown in the waters of this merchatz. But in a different situation, if it's removed to a kli sheni, for example, that wouldn't be a problem to warm it up. You wouldn't say hefshero zeu bishulo. I mean, he's not being cholek necessarily on the previous psak. The etzem, he would agree, hefshero does not constitute bishulo. But if it's in a place that itself would be a real bishul, which is chamei tveria, this is a real bishul that it could be in that kli rishon, there we're going to say hefshero zeu bishulo. So he's not necessarily being cholek in the previous psak. That's how Rashi learns. Understand that?
I didn't understand the whole idea.
It's a very important nikudah. What I just said is, it's not. You look at the Gemara at face value, it sounds like he's not paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. But no, we're saying actually it could be he does paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Generally, you say hefshero is not bishulo. Here, the waters of the merchatz itself are ra'oi levashel. This is a clear rishon. There we say hefshero zeu bishulo. But bechlal elsewhere, we're not going to say hefshero zeu bishulo. Yeah. What do you want to say, Matan?
I didn't understand. So, the water in chamei tveria called kli rishon?
Yes.
So I have to take a separate kli and then pour it from the oil.
Take it out. Scoop it out.
The oil?
No, the oil's in a container. Zebetoch pach, whatever it is, right? And he wants to put the pach inside of the water so it warms up. You don't want to cook it, but to warm it up.
Okay.
So Rabbi Nasi told Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdi, you could do it, but take water out of the merchatz and then put the shemen inside of that. Why? Because then it goes from being kli rishon to being kli sheni,
so
and there's no bishul when it comes to kli sheni.
The kli that collect the water is kli sheni?
Exactly.
And then you put the pach inside
in that would be mutar. Rashi says the logic is because kli sheni causes things to cool down. That's the logic. Yeah, it's very interesting because there's a discussion in the poskim. You have some kli sheni that it mamish maintains the heat, insulated like styrofoam, things that are mamash insulated. It could be just as hot, but this is the yesod. Rashi says it causes it to become a little cooler, and then it doesn't do a bishul.
But you see the reality when you take in a cholent, boiling hot and you scoop it, it
becomes cooler.
Different story.
Right, exactly.
Right away.
Exactly. Okay, good.
So, the psak is what? Is half according to Rabbi Yehuda and half like a ashbag?
The etzim it comes out they're passing like Rabbi Yehuda, which is that there is bishul when it comes to oil. However, it's only when it's yad soledet. If it's just hefshero, it's not bishulo. But if it's in a place, in this case a kli rishon, that it does bishul, there we say hefshero zeu bishulo. Interesting. That's what Rashi explains. Okay.
Sure.
Now the Gemara says a side question.
Like ashbag because shinui, kli sheni.
Kli sheni, it's not because of shinui. Kli sheni is so it's not bishul. Kli sheni is so it's not bishul.
Okay.
Heichi avid hachi. The Gemara says a side question here. Very interesting. Very interesting question the Gemara is about to ask. Heichi avid hachi. How could Rabbi Yehuda Nasi tell him halachot in the merchatz? How could he say Torah in the merchatz? He did. He said, don't do this because the halacha is that you're not right.
How?
What? How what?
He didn't tell him what not to do. He told him what to do.
He said, take it with a kli sheni, so it's not in the merchatz, and it would be a bishul problem. So hold on. He asks the Gemara, how could Rabbi Yehuda say this in the merchatz? In every place you're allowed to have hirhur. It doesn't mean hirurim ra'im. It means in divrei Torah. You're allowed to think in divrei Torah everywhere. Chutz mibeit merchatz mibeit hakisei. Besides for the bathhouse and the bathroom. So how could he say don't do this? So the Rishonim will jump on this question. They say, what's going on over here? You're saying that he was about to do something asur. Of course you're allowed to say. So they say no, but he didn't have to say it this way. He could have just said, I don't want you to do that. He could have just said, I don't want you to do this. But instead, he said it b'derech halacha. But no, Ivantem. The question is, he could have just said, Rebbe, if he tells his Talmud, he's gonna listen. I don't want you to do this. That would have been enough, and he wouldn't have done it. But instead, he said it b'derech halacha.
But it could be the
Talmud.
But the Talmud, when he says something like that in that way, he can understand maybe something different. When the rabbi doesn't want me to serve him,
when they go outside of the merchatz, he'll explain it. So that's the kasha. Is if you're not allowed to be mehaher b'divrei Torah and merchatz, he should have just said, I don't want you to do this. But instead, he said it in a way of teaching. Why? Why did he do that? Maybe you'll say that he said it not in Hebrew, not in Lashon HaKodesh. He said it in Aramit. He said it in English, and that's mutar. But we know that that's not true because V'amar Abayi dvarim shel chol mutar lo amran b'Lashon HaKodesh. That you're allowed to talk about unimportant things, dvarim shel chol, in Lashon HaKodesh. That's mutar. But shel kodesh, when it comes to a place that's dirty, unclean, holy matters, divrei Torah, asur lo amran b'Lashon chol. You're not allowed to say it in Lashon chol. You're not allowed to say it in English, divrei Torah in the merchatz. You're not allowed. So the Gemara answers, Afushe me'isura shani. To separate him from Isur is different. Now this is a big chidush. Tishma chidush. The chidush is, you don't have to just say it in like the shortest way or the way that's not necessarily teaching. You're even allowed to teach the halacha. Very interesting chidush. He could have just said, don't do this, I don't want you to do this. But instead, he taught him halacha. That's mutar even to do in a Beit HaMechatz, to separate somebody from Isur. Very interesting chidush.
Because the main idea is
to say דברי הלכה בבית הכיסא או בית המחץ, זה גדרה דרבנן, זה לא מכובד. אבל תלמד מישהו איסורים על איסור תורה של חילול שבת, זה הרבה יותר חשוב.
For sure.
You teach him something, maybe he can, but when you really give him the halacha, he remember that, and it's something that he can remember forever.
Yeah, but he could tell him after when they leave also.
But he would go.
Meaning in the merchatz, he could have said, don't do. And then when they go out, he would have said, this is why. But the point, that's a chidush, is to say he could even tell him the halacha Obviously in the shortest way possible, but he could teach him the halacha if it's Afushem Yisura.
But you prevent him from
Of course, I understand.
No, but he said, you prevent him from Yisura in the short way, in Remez.
Hit his hand, whatever it is. He could have done something else. He said. I'm sure he did it in the short way, but that. Teidan, the Gemara says we have a proof to this idea. The Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, because Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said Ma'aseh was a story, B'talmido shel Rabbi Meir, a student of Rabbi Meir. Oh, this is your side just now. Shenechanasa acharav lebeit hamechatz, that his student followed him into the Beit hamechatz. It was on Shabbat. Ubikesh la'adiach karka. Now, the student wanted to wash the ground of the mechatz. The problem was, in the mechatz, there was bumps in the ground, and he wanted to wash the ground. And there's the Gzeira de Rabbanan. If you start washing the ground, you'll start smoothing out the bumps, which could be an issue of boneh. So that's why they made a Gzeira, you're not allowed to wash the ground of dirt, and perhaps they even extended it to tile, by the way, just because you might be mashveh the gumot, you might smooth it out, which would be boneh. Va'amar lo, so Rabbi Meir told him, in the mechatz, he said, ein medichin, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to wash it. Then the Talmud wanted to put oils on the ground for a similar thing to make it smell nice. Marlo, and Rabbi Meir said, Ein sachin, we don't do that. So you see, he taught him that, and it's a similar reason, because you might be mashveh the gumot, it's boneh. But the point is, you see, he taught them the halacha, alma afushem isur hashani, he's allowed to say the halacha outright. Hachanami, so too with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, afushem isur hashani, it was acceptable. Beautiful. Amar Ravina, says Ravina. So Ravina says like this. From this story of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Shma mina, we see from this story, Hamevashel b'chamei Tveria b'Shabbat chayav. That if you cook in the waters of Tveria on Shabbat, chayav. Now usually what does chayav mean?
Karet. Chatat.
Meaning chayav
Chatat.
midoraita. That's what it means. Chatat means, the problem is, what kind of a business is that? Chayav midoraita.
זה bishul.
Chamei Tveria, מה אמרנו? בעצם, כל העניין של בישול
אבל זה תולדת חמה. The water is תולדת חמה.
כל העניין של בישול is מן האור. So, chayav, you see from this chayav, what do you mean chayav מדאורייתא?
זה לא בישול של אור, של...
תולדת חמה, מים.
That's the question. So, מה זה חייב? חייב?
תולדת חמה אמרנו שיש בזה חמה.
כן, that's the question. That's the question. חייב is משמע, חייב מדאורייתא, ואינה חייב מדאורייתא.
למה? תולדת חמה זה דאורייתא או רבנן?
מה אמרנו? תולדת חמה is a גזירה, אתו תולדת האור.
So maybe it's according to opinion of Rabbi Yossi.
So, one second. So the Gemara says, how do I know? But because we know, Rebbe, this story happened after the Gzera. Rashi says, because the Gzera was said by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and he existed in the same Tkufa as Rebbe, and we know that this was in Tiberia, so we know that Rebbe, this whole story happened after the Gzera. Va'amar lei, and Rebbe told this Talmid, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, told b'kli sheni v'ten, that you should only put in a kli sheni. So the Gemara says it would appear then that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi held there would be an Isur D'Oraita to cook in Chamei Tveria. Now, how could that possibly be in Isur D'Oraita? איך זה יכול להיות Isur D'Oraita?
Because it's maybe תולדת האור.
How could it be תולדת האור?
Because the ground is from fire.
Esh shel Gehenom. That was one shita which Rabbi Yossi explained in the previous machloket.
But it's something that's spiritual, you know.
The problem is, Eini says the Gemara, is that true? We don't paskin that way. Eini, is that true? The psak is if you cook in Chamei Tveria patur midoraita. Now, the Rabbanan, it's a gzera. But how could you say chayav? So the Gemara answers, "My chayav nami dekama makat mardut." It doesn't mean chayav on a doraita level. What it means is makat mardut. What's makat mardut? Is if somebody transgresses divrei chachamim, mardut means they hit him. Means the chachamim enforce that you get malkot. They hit you. But it doesn't mean chayav midoraita because that's not bishul doraita. So that's what he meant. He meant to say chayav makat mardut. Okay, let's move on now. Next final point.
Patur aval asur.
Patur aval asur. Exactly. It's asur d'Rabbanan. Exactly. Okay. Amar Zeira. Now the Gemara tells us two final points, which is two stories. Rabbi Zeira saw Rabbi Avahu doing something that was controversial, and he wasn't sure what exactly he was doing. Very interesting story here. There's a Gzeira de Rabbanan. You're not allowed to go swimming in a swimming pool on Shabbat. Lama. So that's not the problem. Not the problem. The problem is swimming like in a river, for example, in a river. The problem is you might, you hear how far they went, you might build a raft. You might build a small boat to float in, and that would be mitaken maneh. Okay, when we get to that sugya, we'll speak more about it. But they made a gzeira. You're not allowed to go swimming in a river because you might end up building a raft. Now this gzeira, the chaora, was only if you go swimming. Swimming by definition means your feet leave the ground. Mashma, if you're in a pool, it's 3 feet deep, it's not the same issue. Just want to point that out. The gzeira is you go swimming in a river. River means you're swimming, your feet are off the ground. So Rabbi Zeira said the following. Am Rabbi Zeira. Ana chazite le Rabbi Avahu. I saw Rabbi Avahu. Deshat be'ambati. He swam in a pool. Now, you have to say, how could he bichlal go in a pool? Because we spoke about you're not allowed to go in warm water. So either you say Chamet Tveria, or you say it was cold. Either way, you have to take away that issue. Okay, get away with that, fine. But Rabbi Zeira said, Velo yadana, I don't know, I akar, I lo akar, if his feet left the ground or not. Right? I wasn't sure, did his feet leave the ground or not? I couldn't tell. So the Gemara says, how could you have such a she'ela? Pshita de lo akar. It's obvious his feet did not leave the ground. The Tanya, because the Braita teaches like this. Lo yashut adam bebrecham layamayim. A person is not allowed to swim in a pool that's full of water. Ve'afilu omenet bechatzer. Even if the pool is inside of his courtyard. So Rashi explains, this actually is a different halacha that has to do with tiltul. If the pool is outside in Reshut HaRabim, the problem is the pool could be Reshut HaYachid. If you splash water outside of the pool, that would be a tiltul mimakom to makom from Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim. Or if you splash it in public domain 4 amot, it could also be a problem. The chidush is afilu omeret bechatzer. Even if the pool is in Reshut HaYachid, it's all contained, still it's asur to do. Now, the Gemara says, you see clearly, even if it's a pool in your Reshut, you're not allowed to lift your feet out of it. It's asur. Seems to be. So how can you even have a question? Of course he didn't take his feet off the ground. So the Gemara says, no, it depends how the construction of the pool is. Lo kashya. Turning to Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Ha de let le gidudi, ha de it le gidudi. Rashi explains, this that we said that there is a gzeira is where there's no walls of the pool. There's no fence around the pool. But where there's no gzeira, and perhaps Rabbi Avahu took his feet off the ground, that's where there are walls around the pool. What's the difference between them? Because a river doesn't have walls around it. So if the pool in your backyard doesn't have a fence around it, it looks more domet to a nahar. So there's a gzeira, you're not allowed to take your feet off like a nahar, like a river. But in the case of Rabbi Avahu, his pool, whatever the merchatz, whatever it was, ambati, it was surrounded by a fence. The meiled was not domet to the original gzeira, and therefore Rabbi Zeira said, I wasn't sure, maybe his feet left the ground because that's not domet to the original gzeira. Okay, that's story number 1. Let's continue. What do you not understand?
Left the ground or not left?
He wasn't sure. But the point is, how could you even have a safek? Because this is not like the original gzeira. The original gzeira would be in a pool without a fence. It's like the gzeira. Exactly.
Safa shel habrecha is the cement that's around.
Exactly.
So you make it like more, not like a nahar.
Exactly. Which, by the way, today, interesting, people very often have a fence around their pool.
But I don't think you're talking about this fence. You're talking about safa shel habrecha. They are safa, the cement that you go above the water. You know, you have the water, and then you have like this feet of cement that around the safa.
Yeah, okay, I hear that. I mean, the way Rashi says, "V'li nira de'it legidudi shari de lo dami lenahar ela lekli." That's the point. Exactly. If there's a fence, here, an edge, a bank. I hear what you're saying. It creates like a kli, and that's not a nahar. That's not a nahar. I hear that. A bank, I think it's called. But yeah, the embankment. Embankment, maybe. Let's continue. Now this story, it's the same people, but it's a completely different story. But Amar Rabbi Zeira continues on another story with Rabbi Avahu. Rabbi Avahu, understand, it's unbelievable. Is when they said, I saw what the rabbi did, there's halachot, meaning it wasn't just Stam saying, Sipur Ba'alma. There's a reason he's telling us the story, because probably you learn halacha from the story. I mean, that's the point. Amar Rabbi Zeira, Ana chazite Rabbi Avahu, she'iniach yadav keneged panav shel mata, ve'lo yad'ana inaga ilo naga. Very interesting story. I saw Rabbi Avahu was going to the river, okay, on Shabbat, let's say he was going to the river. Slicha, not on Shabbat. It's nothing to do with Shabbat. Nothing to do with Shabbat. I saw Rabbi Avahu was going to the river. Okay, he was going to Tovel in the river. What happened was, when he was going down to the river, Rabbi Zeira reported, he put his hand, Sheniach Yadav Keneged Panav Shel Mata. Keneged Panav Shel Mata, it's a Lashon Saginar, it's a Lashon Naki. It's a nice way to speak, which really means his private area. He used his hand to cover his private area when he went down into the river. Velo yad'ana inaga ilo naga. Now Rashi says, why did he do it? He did this because of tzniut. Means it's not sanua for him to go without covering his private area, so he covered it with his hand.
That's
I don't know. 1 second. Hold on with that. I don't know if he touched his private area or not. That's what Rabbi Zeira said. I saw him do this. He went down to the Nahar. It was not Shabbat, just Stam. I don't know if he covered it, I don't know if he touched it or not. So the Gemara says again, a similar shakla v'tarya. Pshita de lo naga, obviously he didn't touch it. Why? The tiny, because the Braita says, Eliezer Omer, Kolo achez ba'ama mashtin, even when you go to the bathroom, mashtin is you urinate, even if you hold your private area when you go to urinate, ki'ilu mevi mabul olam. It's like mabul olam. It's like bringing a mabul to this world. Rashi says why? Because we know the Dora mabul, one of the averot that they were punished for was motzi zera levatala. So if a person touches his private area, he could bring himself to motzi zera levatala, and memela, it's like you're destroying the world, like the mabul that happened then. Very strong. So of course R Avahu didn't touch his private area, not even a question.
So you're just covering his private area?
That's the question. Amar Abayis says, no, Rabbi Zeira did have a safek. Why did he have a safek? Because asa'u ki boleshet. They made Rabbi Avahu like boleshet. Boleshet is an army that comes to conquer a city. Now let me just tell you the short point and then we'll see it inside. We're going to see that the halakha is as follows. We know if a goy touches wine, yayin, so the Rabbanan made a gzera, we look at it as yayin nesech. What's yayin nesech? Yayin nesech means if they poured it or shook it for avodah zara. Usually people aren't doing that today, but the gzera is if they touch it.
It's still nesech.
If they touch it, they shake it, they might have dedicated it for avodah zara and it's asur. Okay, fine. Now, there used to be, there were times in history, and the Mishnah talks about these cases in avodah zara, where an army came into a Jewish city. And then they hung out there for a bit, and then there were barrels of wine left around. And we don't know if the Goyim touched it or didn't touch it. We don't know. So the Mishnah says as follows. It's not. If an army, non-Jewish army, they entered a city. Bisha'at shalom. Now, if it's a time of peace, meaning they're not fighting right now, everything's calm. So the problem is that gives them more time for leisure. They have more time on their hands. So then, chavuyot ptuchot asurot, the open barrels of wine, of Jewish wine in the city, are now asur, because we have to be choshesh, they probably touched it, drank from it, etc. So it's yain nesech. Stumot, now the sealed barrels, mutarot, because you could look at them, they're not concerned. If they wanted to, they would open it. And we're not going to think they sealed it up after. They don't have any interest in that. So memela, if it's sealed up, you could assume they didn't touch it, they didn't drink from it, and it's mutar. B'sha'at milchama, it's very interesting. But if it's at a time that they're busy with war, they're focused on the war effort, elu ve'elu mutarot. Even the open barrels are mutarot. Why are they mutarot? Exactly. They're busy with the intensity of war and they're not touching it. Because they don't have the opportunity, the time to do yain nesech. That's the Mishnah in Avodah Zarah. So what's the point? Alma, we see, kivan de be'iti lo menaschi. Since they're fearful, I mean they're scared, they're anxious about war, they're not busy dealing with the wine. You don't even have to worry about that. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Avahu is the same thing. Maybe he did touch his private area. How's it mutar? Hachanami kivan debayit lo atile hirhuri. Because the whole problem is if you touch your private area, it could create hirhur and motzi zera levatala.
Protecting his.
He's worried over here, so he's not, even if he would touch it, it wouldn't create a problem. What's he worried about, by the way? Exactly. So, what is the worry? What was he concerned about? Because you're at the edge of a river, there's strong currents in the river, it's dangerous. So there, says the Gemara, Rabbi Zeira had a legitimate safek. Maybe he touched it back. There, it wouldn't be an issue like we spoke about before. Where it's stam, it's a problem. But here, where he was concerned about falling, the waters are strong, sakana, there, even to touch it, he wouldn't come to hirhur, and therefore it might have actually been Mutar.
תלוי במצב שהבן אדם נמצא בו. אם הבן אדם עכשיו, נתנו פה את הדוגמה לצבא.
שזה חילוק.
שנכנסים, ורואים עכשיו שיש חביות פתוחות, אם זה מצב של שלום, יש מצב של ההרוסת. הגויים עשו עבודה זרה. אסור לגעת בזה. אבל אם עכשיו זה מצב שהוא יש לו פה איזו סיטואציה שאין לו עכשיו זמן לערער בזה, אז אין לו בכלל משהו שמטריד את המחשבה שלו בזה.
אז אפילו פותר זה לא...
הוא פטור מזה, הוא לא בכלל מתעסק בזה, זה לא המטרה שלו.
Okay, but let's finish up. Now, this whole idea of Rabbi Avahu covering his private parts, this itself, bichlal, even if he didn't touch it, it creates a question. So the Gemara says, Amy, is this true? A person who goes to the mikveh or the merchatz and he covers his privates, very interesting. It's like you're denying the treaty of Avraham Avinu. What's the pshat? Avraham Avinu was the one who got the mitzvah of Brit Milah. If you cover your privates, it's as if you're embarrassed about Brit Milah. So, says the Gemara, you cover your privates, it's like you're denying the mitzvah of Brit. You're embarrassed by it. Oh, so the kasha is, it seems to be, bichlal, even in the times of merchatz or mikveh, it's a problem. How could he cover? So, lo kasha, the Gemara answers, ha-kinachit, ha-kisalik. The difference is, when he's going down into the river, his back is to the people.
No problem.
So there, you don't cover it, because it's not a tzniut issue. People can't see you in the front. So there to cover would be kilu kofer b'bito shel Avraham Avinu. But kisalik, when you come out of the water, you get up from the water, there you're facing the people. So to cover there would be an inyan of tzniut, and it's not kofer b'bito shel Avraham Avinu. And the Gemara tells us other approaches about this. Ki had Rava shachi. Now Rava wanted to avoid the issue of touching v'chulei. He would just bend over a little bit. So when he would go in the water or out of the water, seemingly both, he would just bend over so it would cover his privates naturally. Rabbi Zeira zakif, but Rabbi Zeira would stand up normally. He didn't hold this was a problem, and therefore he would go in and come out normally. But the Rabbanan made a pshara. Rabbanan debe Ravashi, Rabbanan of the Beit Midrash Ravashi, they did a pshara. Ki hava nachti zakfi, when they would go into the water, they would stand up straight again, because it's not sniut, your back is to the people, that's not a problem, and they wouldn't cover. Ki kasalki, when they got out of the water and they were facing the people, shachi, they would bend over a little bit, again, so that it would cover in the sniut type of way. And that would come out like... Like Rabba. No, because, no. Rabba.
Because Rabba used to live outside.
Shachi. No, so Rabba held Shachi bichlal, going in and coming out. Exactly. The Rabbanan made a pshara.
Before Zakuf.
Afterwards they came out bent over. Exactly. We will stop here, Chevra. Bezat Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Final story, Bizera. Bezat Hashem. Stopping halfway down my mouth. Bezat Hashem.